Hi, my name is Bruce Bolger, and I'm founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, and we're one of the world's only organizations, I believe, focused on the implementation of stakeholder management practice, which is simply total quality management for people. And as part of our educational program, we do a lot of free things, including our media and also our shows, our EEA YouTube shows. And in particular, we have a channel with our co-host Jackie Basco, who I'm afraid is sick today with the flu, on meaningful meetings. Communications are one of the most powerful elements of an enterprise approach to engagement, and meetings are one of the most frequently, and I would argue sometimes, misused programs. So what we do in this program is we gather people who have, advisors and experts in all areas of management who do public speaking to kind of get an in-depth view for them about what they've learned from all these experiences. So today we're lucky to have Dr. Gary Chapman, who, if you're married, you've probably heard of him. He's written one of the most best-selling books of all time on love and marriage, and that's the five love languages, I should say. And that was first published in 1992, and I think it's getting on to, you'll tell us, a billion sale, an enormous amount of sales. And Paul White, he is a PhD, and he's author, along with Gary, of Five Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. And that takes the principles of Gary Chapman's love languages and applies them to work. And so what we're going to do today is learn from them what they've learned from all of this. So bear with me 1 second to thank all of the people that we help support in supporting your company's efforts to improve engagement across the enterprise. And again, we always want to remind people of all the free information that I am trying to show you that the slideshow will not cooperate with. We're a how-to organization. Much of what we do is free. We're here to help you improve performance through people. So I'm now going to stop the share. And Gary, in deference to your having kicked off this whole concept, kind of first tell us, you became a pastor. What was the trigger in your life? Before we get to the book, what was the trigger in your life that set you out on the path of ministry?
Bruce, I was 17 years old, a senior in high school, and really sensed that God wanted me in some kind of ministry. And at that juncture, I only knew there was two vocational journeys. One was to be a pastor, and one was to be a missionary. And in my mind, missionaries lived in the jungle. I didn't like snakes. So I thought God must want me to be a pastor. So I went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago and took what they call the pastor's course. Moody, of course, is a school that's been there over 100 years, started by D.L. Moody, who was an evangelist similar to the Billy Graham in his day in the 1800s. And so that's where my journey all started. And that's where in Chicago at Moody Bible Institute, which is an interdenominational school, I sometimes jokingly say that's the first time I learned that they're Christians who aren't Baptists.
Well, by the way, that's a beautiful thing. I think interdenominational is really the spirit. I'm not going to speak for the Lord, but there's a lot of denominations. He must have put them here for a reason. Paul, what got you? How did you? And we're going to get back to the five languages of love in a minute, of course. But Paul, what got you? First off, you started off as a management consultant, didn't you, if I recall?
Well, actually, even before that, so I'm a licensed psychologist, and for a good part of my career, I tested students that have learning difficulties, so ADHD and dyslexia and autism, and was doing that. But mid-career, some friends of mine that were business consultants kept running into family issues because 85% of the companies in the U.S. are family-owned, and I had grown up in the context of a family-owned business outside Kansas City, and so I started working with them. Dealing with the family issues intertwined with running a business, family-owned business, and largely business succession and wealth transfer issues. And in the midst of that, I was actually in North Carolina working with a highway construction company and asked the dad, how's this succession plan going? And he says, it's going fine. My son's stepping up. I think it's going to work. I walk across the hall and ask the son the same question. And he said, this is a disaster. I can't ever please my dad. And I could, identify with some of that. And so I thought, I wonder how to help with this. And Kathy, my wife, and I were reading Five Love Languages at the time, probably rereading it at that point. And I thought, I wonder if this could work in workplaces. So I pursued Gary, and he graciously agreed to work with me on applying it to work-based relationships.
So, in effect, a business experience in which a father is really not expressing appreciation in the way he meant to triggered your reaching out to Gary. And I would imagine this wasn't so simple. Gary didn't know you for a hole in the wall, right? You're
Right.
you are very well known now, but I don't think you were as recognized back then. So, Gary, this might have come as a little surprise. So, let me ask you, what made you think, and I'm going to get back to five languages of appreciation, I mean, five languages, five love languages in a second, but what made you respond to Paul's inquiry?
Well, Paul shared with me two research projects. And Paul, you can correct me if my figures are wrong, but as I remember, one of them indicated that 70% of the people who have a job in this country say they feel little appreciation at work. And the other research project, as I remember, was that 64% of the people who leave a job and go to another job say they left primarily because they didn't feel appreciated where they were. And when he shared those two research projects with me, I said, well, I can certainly see the need. And I know that this concept of love languages will help people in all relationships. I said, so if you're willing to do the research and prove that it's true and it really helps, then I'm with you. And it helped also that he's a graduate of Wheaton College, which was also where I did, after I went to Moody Bible Institute, I graduated from Wheaton College. So I thought, well, here's a guy, we have similar background educationally, so I can join up with this guy. So that's how it
That's
all
great.
started.
And, excuse me, and that was about 8 years ago now, wasn't it?
A little more. It was in 2009.
Okay. So now let's get back to the five love languages, because I think a lot of it must have come from your work as a pastor. Tell us about how you came up with that concept, because you're not an organizational psychologist, I believe, right, Gary?
No,
So this is
no,
something, it sounds like it came from your heart.
yeah, what happened was when I got working in the local church, and of course, I've served on the same church staff now for 50 years, the
The
same local
same
church.
congregation
Yeah, same congregation,
in
50 years.
Winston-Salem.
Yes.
Wow.
Officially, I retired 2 years ago, but they let me keep my office and my assistant, so I'm still here.
Right.
But what I found in the church when I started leading classes on marriage is that people who were really hurting wanted to talk. And I kind of got pushed into counseling. I mean, I had taken courses on counseling in seminary, of course, but back in those days, seminaries didn't even offer a master's in counseling. I mean, this is going way back, okay? But they did offer some classes, and I'd taken those classes, and I think I have a lot of empathy for people, and that's certainly a requirement for counselors. So my counseling has all been as a pastor, pastoral counseling. But what I discovered in the context of all of that is that what made one person feel loved did not make another person feel loved. And I remember the first time I encountered it, a lady said in the office, she said, Dr. Chapman, we're cordial. We don't fight with each other, but I just don't feel any love coming from him. And she said, I just feel empty inside, and I don't know how long I can go on like this. Well, I looked over at him, and he said, I don't understand her. I do everything I can to show her that I love her. And she says she doesn't feel loved. I don't know what else I could do. And I said, well, what do you do? And he rattled off all these things. I get home before she does. I start the evening meal. After the meal, I wash the dishes. Thursday night, I vacuum the floors. Saturdays, I wash the car. I mow the grass. I help her with the laundry. He went on with all these things, and I was beginning to wonder, well, what does this woman do? It sounded to me like he was doing everything, And so that's when it dawned on me that here was a sincere husband who was expressing love to his wife in the only way he knew how, and a wife who didn't get it. And after that, I heard similar stories over and over in my office. And I knew there had to be a pattern to it. So eventually, I sat down and read several years of notes that I had made and asked myself the question, when someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into five categories. And I later called them the five love languages. So that's where it was born. It grew out of my counseling for a number of years. And I began to use it then in my counseling and found it helped people connect when they realize, oh, I've got to learn to speak her language. I've got to learn to speak his language. And then I started teaching it in small classes, and the same thing would happen. So it was probably 5 years later before I actually wrote the book. But I knew by that time that the concept would help people.
You know, it's really funny because when you look at the guy, I've been married successfully for, I guess, 35 years. And it's, of course, never easy, or not always easy. But let me note something, and there's no scientific proof for this, but, you know, I've looked at your work and I've looked at Paul's work. And there's no question in my mind that this is one of the biggest disconnects that we all have. We think we're expressing love the way that we want it expressed, never thinking that the other person, no, that's not his language. That's not her language. So she doesn't even know what I'm saying to her if I express. So that woman that in your story there, to her, that was just her husband being himself.
Yeah.
He's a dutiful, great guy, but that's not love. So Paul, and again, we're going to get into more into this. You're not off the hook yet on this, Gary. But Paul, now, what made you realize, I guess being a married man like I am, and I think also for a very long time, that wow, this could really help in work as well? Because we all know the statistics that Gary cites are correct. But what made you realize that could work in work?
Well, it just seemed like there was sort of an innate uh, need that we have, both to feel loved and to feel valued or appreciated. And that the workplace, as I was working with different businesses and sort of observing what was going on and through, you know, human resource programs and so forth about recognition and rewards, that I was talking to my HR friends and I said, you know, this isn't working because people were still not uh, feeling valued. They were complaining a lot. You know, they'd say, you know, they don't care about us. And so it seemed like there was a gap there, or there was sort of, it was just missing. And so Gary and I had some calls and we talked together about what the equivalent in the workplace might be of love, and came up with the concept of appreciation, that a person wants to feel valued. And so then started to look at each of the languages practically and what does that mean in the workplace, because one of the concepts is just knowing a person's language is a good start, but really you need to know the specific actions. And one of the differences between in personal relationships and with your marriage or your family is you can, you know, sort of interact and exchange ideas, but in the workplace, it's sort of weird to say, you know, how do you want to be shown appreciation? And so we wanted to define the specific action. So say quality time is one of the languages. Over time, we found that there's actually a sort of generational difference that for those of us that are a bit older, quality time meant time with your supervisor or manager because it was just, you know, that was a commodity that was important. But for younger employees, they don't value that as much. It's more for them spending time with their peers. And so it was sort of pulling together some different ideas and themes and thinking that it worked. It wasn't for sure, but I thought it was worth giving it a go.
Well, and 9 years later, here you are.
Yeah.
So, but now, Gary, you know, the rest of this is now going to be more focused on what you both have learned from all this, because, you know, anybody who tries to make change is going to get pilloried in one way or another. So here it is. You're a man who's not a psychologist, you're not a scientist, but you've had a ton of experience helping people deal with marriage, and you write a book. And then that book skyrockets and it sells like heck, which is a wonderful thing. But it's not always easy succeeding. So tell us, what are some of the lessons you've learned from being a successful publisher, getting out there, or author, and from ministering all of these people in their journeys to try to find love? Because the one thing, for instance, following your book, my wife, her favorite expression is acts of service. And thanks to you, I'm that guy out mowing the lawn. So these are a bit, but what is it like to have changed so many lives? There must be some impact on you, some lessons that you've learned that you'd share with your grandkids or children, asking for your advice.
Well, you know, it's very encouraging, Bruce. I do Saturday marriage conferences around the country on a regular basis. And basically, every time I do a conference, I'll have two or three, sometimes even six or eight, that will come up to me during the day and say, "We just want to share with you that that book saved our marriage 15 years ago or 20 years ago. You know, we were at the point of just feeling like this is not working, and neither one of us feel loved. And we read the book, and it was like the lights came on, and we realized how we had been sincerely, each of us expressing love, but missing each other because we weren't speaking the right language. And so we took the quiz, we learned each other's language, we started speaking it, and it literally saved our marriage." Well, you can imagine for an author how encouraging that is, you know. And of course, I've seen that in my counseling through the years when couples come in with no hope, feel like they're just too different, it's just not working. And, you know, 9 months later, after we've done this, the languages and a lot of other things, they walk out just, you know, their marriage reborn. And so I think for any pastoral counselor or even psychology counselor, anyone, that's one of the paybacks, I think, for investing time in people's lives and helping them discover practical ideas that really do enhance the relationship. So, yeah, it's been very, very satisfying to see the way this concept has helped so many people, not only in this culture, but around the world, which have been published in over 50 languages now around the world, which surprises me because my academic background, undergrad and later a master's, is in cultural anthropology, studying cultures all over the world. And I was very sensitive to cultural differences. So when the first publisher came and wanted to publish it, it was Spanish. I said to my publisher, "I don't know if this works in Spanish culture, you know." And they said, "Well, they've read the book and they want to publish it." I said, "Well, okay, let's go." It became their bestseller and it's still one of their bestsellers. So
So,
it's not just, you know, not just in American culture, but really it's around the world.
well, hold
Which,
on, I've got to stop you here because this is rather, we want to talk about lessons shared. Are you telling me, because remember, one of the interesting things about yours and Paul's work is that it's validated by sales. Think about that. A lot of research is validated by inferences, empirical this, correlations, causations. Yours is, hey, people are buying the book. Why are they buying the book? If
yeah,
it didn't work after 18 years, we'd know that. So what you're telling me, how many languages is this book in?
it's over 50 languages now.
So that means Asia and every continent, there's a book of yours. Is
Yeah,
that what you're telling me? And
yeah.
what you're telling us is that these are universal laws. Laws might be a strong word. These are universal trends, is what you're telling me. You didn't have to change. In China, there are men who appreciate acts of appreciation versus a high five or a gift of, a material gift. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, and what I'm saying is, Bruce, this really, really surprised me. But it does seem to me now, after all these years, that these five are pretty fundamental to human nature. Now, I know the dialects of these languages will differ in different cultures. For example, physical touch, for example. There are cultures where if you and I met on the street, I'd kiss you on the right cheek and kiss you on the left cheek.
No.
Well, we don't do that in our culture. We might give a handshake or a high five, you know. So the what I call dialects of the languages may differ from culture to culture, but the fundamental languages seem to be universal now to me. I didn't think this at first, but they now seem to be rather fundamental to human nature.
And Paul, this seems to be validated on the business side. Your book is in what, 25 languages now?
Yeah, 25 languages. Yep.
And so
And
and also on each continent?
yes, uh-huh.
So what we're learning here, and by the way, I love these shows, by gentlemen. What a way to make a living, really.
Mhm.
Because I learned something in each one of these, and I never thought about that. And I've lived in other countries, and I realize now that you're right. In France, they kiss each other instead of, they do everything over there. But but the bottom line is, that's really an important universal. But let me ask you both. This also applies to both of you. Gary, if everything were so easy, okay, I figured out that acts of service are very important to my wife. And it's spontaneous acts of service, by the way. It's not, hey, Bruce, will you do this? And I say, yeah, I'll do it. No, it's understanding what would make her happy and doing it and surprising her. But what have you found? Okay, I read your book. Somebody reads your book. What does it take to really get something from the book? Is it just a matter, okay, I'm going to do acts of service? You referred to some work that goes on. It is a little bit more than reading the book, isn't it? What have you learned about what makes the marriage inevitably, I mean, succeed in the end?
It really comes down to attitude because I sometimes say, I'm giving you information and how you can effectively communicate love on an emotional level to the other person. I can't give you motivation. We choose our attitudes. And I believe that people choose an attitude, either an attitude of love. I'm not talking just about marriage. I'm talking about in all of life. We choose an attitude of love, which is the attitude, I want to enrich the lives of the people that I encounter. That's the attitude of love. The opposite of that is an attitude of selfishness. I'm going to see what I can get out of life, whether it's marriage, whether it's business. I'm in this for myself. Well, we all lean in one of those two directions. If we have an attitude of love in a marriage, then the 5 love languages gives you information on how to really enhance the life of that other person by meeting this fundamental need they have, the need to feel loved. And I think the same principle is true, of course, in the workplace as well. But again, we don't choose our emotions, but we do choose our attitude every single day. I've had men say to me, Dr. Chapman, I read your book. My wife and I took the quiz. Her language is acts of service. But I'm going to tell you and her, if it's going to take my washing dishes and my vacuuming floors for her to feel loved, she can forget that. And I say to him, that's your choice. If you want to live with a wife who has what I call an empty love tank, that's your choice. Love is a choice. And so what you're telling me is, your attitude is, I'm not going to do anything I don't want to do. Okay, then live a selfish lifestyle.
All right, folks. Another big, really, really, I've been around a lot, Gary. I've heard a lot of things, but I love the way you're saying this because remember, we all forget. The reason we keep talking about these things is that they're not happening, right? The divorce rate is still 51% in this country, and a lot of people aren't even getting married now. So the lesson that you're saying here is, folks, where is your heart? Where is your heart deep down? Is your heart have a general positive outlook of gratitude, of grace, of forgiveness? Or does your heart have anger and selfishness and self-preservation? Are you kind of basically saying that that foundation is really kind of what determines not only how we go through marriage, but how we go through love? I mean,
Yeah,
and
I think it's true. And I think Paul can speak to the business world about this, but I think it's true in the business world. There are business men and women who lead a business for themselves, basically. There's others who live a business because they want to enrich the lives of the people. Certainly they want to make money. I mean, you have to make money in a
of
business,
course.
but you have an attitude of serving the people that you're in your area. Or you have an attitude of, I don't care whether they feel appreciated or not. In fact, Paul, you remember we had a man say that. I don't care if my men feel appreciated or not. He said, I give them a job. They get the job done. I pay them. They don't get the job done. I fire them. Well, obviously he has a selfish attitude.
And by the way, his business could succeed, might succeed, and his marriage might succeed. But is it succeeding on the best possible grounds? So, Paul, I'm going to pivot to you. I kind of have to laugh because, well, you and I are kindred spirits, I think, and we in our love of capitalism, but in our regret that it's not always practiced with the grace of God,
Mm.
really, frankly. I think the golden rule might be one of the number one rules not followed in business. But I won't ask you gentlemen to comment on
Mm.
that. But Paul, I will ask you. You're, an apostle of appreciation, which is a warm and fuzzy. And I've heard CEOs basically say, that's a door closer. You know, just what Gary said, look, we pay you, you do your job, blah, blah, blah. What was it like when you started talking about the world of appreciation in 2010? Were there a bunch of, or whatever year that was, 2012, were there a bunch of doors closed? Did-
Actually, it was interesting because it was sort of disruptive in the world of workplace culture and human resources, because at that time, the major focus was on reward and recognition programs, and it still is to some degree. But people, when they heard the message that valuing and appreciating your people leads to better organizational results. They're like, yeah, I get that. And you can sort of come to the profitability or whatever rules or expectations you have in the same way of having an attitude that I'm going to use these people to get as much out of them as I can, and then sort of toss them away if they don't function, or if they wear out, then I'll get somebody else. Or you can treat your people well and support them and have positive and even more positive results than if you just treat them like a commodity. And so one of the interesting things to me was, because some people are easier to appreciate than others. And people would say, well, what do you do if you don't appreciate somebody? And I said, well, first of all, you don't fake it, because people have pretty good sensors about whether you're being honest and upfront about that and genuine. And that will undermine any kind of existing trust. But what we found over time is that to get to know the person beyond their performance and their role and responsibilities, and that often people struggle with appreciating others. I find when they're sort of a second tier supervisor, they don't directly supervise them, but they supervise their supervisor. And so they don't really know exactly what this person does or their strengths. And so I encourage them to get to know that. But then secondly, to just spend a little time, because getting to know them personally, because that creates some opportunity for touchstones, whether they grew up in a military family or have the same, sports team they root for, or hobbies or whatever, and looking for some value that the person has, because there are points in our careers that we're not at the best. Life happens, and there's stressors in life, and that doesn't mean the person doesn't have value as an employee. It may mean they need support. And so it's been an interesting journey that, to be honest, sort of like, individuals, some people get it and some people don't. And, you know, I just say, try not to be obstructive, just step to the side and watch, and let us sort of implement the program to show people how to communicate appreciation in a way that's meaningful to the recipient, because that's really the key, is finding out how your colleagues or team members want to be shown appreciation, and communicating it that way. And when that happens, good results follow.
Well, it's really funny, and Gary, I think this is going to apply to marriage as well. Some really interesting work is being done in value creation in business, and a group called Irrational Capital, which is a pure human capital analytics company. Dan Ariely, you may have heard that name because he's from Duke, not far down the interstate from you. And he's done a whole bunch of research tied to share price performance. And guess what? And so what he did, and this work has been validated by JP Morgan Quantitative Analytics Group. Okay, these are, and they're not paid to do it. They're completely independently validating it. And what they have validated, Paul's stock is going to go up here, is that companies in which employees feel a high level of appreciation, that word, that word, appreciation, along with 30 other criteria that would be natural, that they sense of, mission, purpose, goals, objectives, they're developed, they're all those things. These companies have a 4% future equity value over companies that don't. In other words, your stock each year will be 4% higher if you have a culture of high appreciation. And that, Paul, can't be faked. You cannot fake appreciation. So, Gary, let me ask you, relate that statistic to marriage for a moment. I know you've taken enough hate for not being a scientist, a social scientist, but would your instinct tell you that the marriages in which people that it is a causative, not correlative element, and that's a critical difference, that marriages in which people feel appreciated by one another contributes to a positive marriage, or is it merely a correlation? Oh, we happen to feel appreciated, therefore it's a good marriage. Which one would you say it is, or both?
I think it's a huge issue. In fact, many times when you get down to the couples who are thinking of divorce, many times they're saying things like, I just don't feel any love coming from them. It's just gone, you know? And there are other things. Obviously, they've had arguments, they've had disagreements, and they've, said hateful things to each other and all that sort of thing. But at the root of all of it is that sense that the need to feel loved is not being met in the marriage. And that's kind of the final breaking point. And that's what people talk about. Now, I think there's many other things to marriage, to be sure. Love language is not the only thing that makes a good marriage. But I do think it's a fundamental issue. And that if this need is met and we genuinely feel loved by each other, it's much easier to work through our conflicts, and treat each other with dignity and respect as we share our different ideas with each other, and then look for something that we can come to find an agreement on. Learning how to solve conflicts is a big part of marriage, no question about it. But if this need is being met, it creates a climate in which it's much easier to solve those conflicts.
Well, I'm going to
Yeah,
have, you guys
Bruce,
have been generous with your time, but so I'm going to ask you though to stay 2 more minutes. Paul, what were you going to say?
I was just to say the same thing happens in work. When people feel valued and appreciated, conflict and those irritation kinds of things that happen over stupid little things, what size your monitor is, where you have a window, all that kind of stuff goes away, because when people feel valued, they understand at the core that they're okay and they can deal with little things. If they don't feel valued, those become really, unfortunately, major issues that eat up time and energy of the managers and supervisors.
And could one argue that what Gary just said is correct about work too, when a talented person, or a customer for that matter, just no longer feels the love, just no longer feels the appreciation, they're much more likely to bolt too, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, 80% of the time, people who leave voluntarily cite a lack of appreciation as one of the key factors for them leaving. So
So to
it's
wrap
there.
up, Gary, I'm going to ask you this. You minister a lot of people, and I have a hypothesis I'd like to check with you, that a lot of the unhappiness in this country is not politics, it's our jobs. A lot of unhappiness is our dissatisfaction with the work that we do, with the companies that we work for, the lack of appreciation. But we can't vote out our CEO, right? We can't vote out our boss, but we can vote out the people in the government that we don't like. Get rid of them, right? And am I wrong? I don't know what people say to you when they're unhappy, but am I wrong that a lot of people don't even sleep well on Sunday night? They're so unhappy.
Yeah, I think there are many people in our culture who have never found really a reason for living.
Hmm.
And consequently, those who have found that life's deepest meaning is found in relationships and enhancing the lives of other people, they're the people who have the greatest satisfaction in life. But those who do not have that sense that they want to impact the lives of others in a positive way, and they're just living for their own selfishness, it's one pleasure after another pleasure after another pleasure. And after a while, they have no real sense for why am I even living, So I think this is at the very heart of what marriage and human relationships are all about. It's discovering that we're here to enrich the lives of other people, and it is in serving others that we find life's deepest sense of satisfaction.
So, Paul, as a corollary to that, if our CEOs have that same spirit embedded in them, it's much easier to create a culture of appreciation, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it does start with that attitude from the beginning that, for example, in our organization, our purpose is to serve our clients. I mean, and be profitable as well. But when you meet the needs of your customers and clients and do it in a respectful and quality way, then you're going to make money. I mean, So it is coming at really the whole job purpose of work is to meet the needs or desires of the people you serve and earn a living while you're doing it versus trying to make money and then figuring out the way to sort of move the puzzle pieces to get there. It falls apart over time, and you see that you can be successful for a short time financially, but if the core isn't there, it's not going to last very long.
So the last question, it's almost a yes or no, Gary. Are you optimistic that our hearts are opening, that the arc of history is creating a greater percentage of people who really want to start off with love rather than anger? Or are we kind of stuck right now and the jury is out?
I want to believe that it's getting better. I don't know that I have a lot of evidence for that right now, but I do believe that as people discover the reality that serving others brings life's deepest meaning, we're going to see some good things happen in our culture. And that's what I'm hoping for.
And in Paul, in your case, we're having the people like Irrational Capital proving that it's better business. Maybe the application of the golden rule to business it's maybe it's not a coincidence that it's called the golden rule. Who knows? Anyway, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for your time. A lot of wisdom here. And what we do is we summarize this wisdom in an article for those of you who don't want to sit through this, but this is one heck of a show to sit through. Thank you so much to both of you. And this will be published next week. And of course, I'll share it with you and our entire audience. Thanks again.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.